to Global Pay Fest 25. This is our 24-hour journey around the world, exploring the complexities and intricacies of global payroll. I'm Esthie Viljoen, I'm Customer Success Manager at JGA Recruitment, and I'll be your host for this session. I'm absolutely delighted to be continuing our Global Pay Fest in South Africa. It's a massive region to learn, so multinational organisations are expanding their presence across Africa, and understanding the payroll landscape in South Africa is becoming increasingly essential. South Africa has progressive labour regulations, a complex tax structure, and unique employment equity requirements, which present distinct challenges that require specialised knowledge. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Esthie Viljoen. She's a South African payroll expert from EPI-USE and has extensive experience helping multinational companies to navigate the intricacies of South African payroll. Esthie's been at EPI-USE since 1998, and since then she's been involved with numerous global SAP HR and payroll wall-to-wall implementations, upgrades, support projects, you name it, Esthie's done it. She's currently a SAP HR project manager, which has given her experience across multiple global implementations and lots of different industries as well. So with an impressive 28 years of SAP HCM experience, we couldn't have anyone better to guide us through South African payroll. Esthie's role as a project manager on global payroll and e-time implementations means that she's taken on responsibilities like project management, looking at clocking hardware, training, change management, data migration, integrations, and obviously taking on that wider payroll piece as well. So Esthie, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our global audience. I wondered if you just wanted to quickly introduce yourself and just say hello to everyone watching.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you. My name is Esthie Viljoen. I am from Pretoria, South Africa, and my current job role is project manager at EPI-USE Global Services. And I am very excited to be sharing some of my South African payroll experiences with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Esthie. So during our session today, we'll be spending an hour looking at key South African payroll challenges. So we'll start off by going through Esthie's expert presentation in South African payroll. This will uncover recent regulatory updates, best practices, and those key challenges that people face when taking South African payroll. We'll then move on to a little bit of a case study so you can see some of Esthie's expert knowledge in a real life scenario. And at the end, as with all of the other sessions, we will do a quick Q&A asking Esthie some of those important questions on South African payroll that you guys want to know answers to. So to start, shall we get going with the presentation where Esthie will break down everything you need to know about South African payroll.
Okay, Natalie. Let me share my presentation with you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so Global Pay Fest 2025 South Africa. So a quick table of content. I'm going to look at the South African payroll landscape and the framework, the laws of payroll, laws of worker classifications in South Africa, then leave management and the leave holiday payments, law of statutory reporting, and then also submissions, laws of your equity reporting in South Africa. We're going to look at employer tax declaration, also better known in South Africa as the EMP 501 form. We're going to touch on the retirement fund in South Africa, laws of payroll record keeping, and then if you've got any further questions. So let me dive into the first one, our South African landscape and the framework. So a labour law framework and foundation is supported by approximately 7 acts in South Africa. So the first one is the most important one, our Basic Conditions of Employment Act, better known as the BCAE, Labour Relations Act, the LRA, our Employment Equity Act, or also known as the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. We've got a Skills Development Act, Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases, COIDA, in short. We've got our normal Protection of Personal Information Act, the POPI Act, and then lastly, but also most importantly, our Income Tax Act. Let me move on. So, two basic laws of Payroll South Africa. All companies that should be registered with the South African Revenue Services if you are deducting pay as you earn, or better known as tax. If you're deducting tax from an employee, you have to be a registered company. If you are deducting skills development levies, you have to be registered as a company. And if you deduct employment insurance as well. So those three key aspects determines whether you should be registering as a company in South Africa or not. And then the second one, there's a lot of bargaining councils in South Africa, depending on the specific industry that you are working in. So minimum wages are dictated by bargaining councils per industry. Hours of work are dictated by a bargaining council, depending on the industry you're in, as well as the overtime rates that you are paying your employees. So very important. Then workers' classification in South Africa. So firstly, every company must have a contract of employment for every single employee. Secondly, there are different classifications for workers as employees in a company. So a person is normally considered as an employee if he or she works more than 24 hours per month. However, if you're not working 24 hours or less a month, you are not covered as an employee by the South African Basic Conditions of Employment Act, or you are not considered as an employee of that company. So there are specific scenarios or situations where temporary workers can be covered in the same rights as those as permanent workers. Okay, so that is how we classify an employee of a company. So if we move on to leave management, we've got a few main types of leave highlighted in bold. We've got annual leave, or better known as holiday leave in other countries. So in South Africa, we've got 21 consecutive calendar days that includes your weekends, or 15 working days that adds up to 3 weeks. And this annual leave are normally accrued at 1.25 days per month, depending whether you are full-time employed or part-time employed. So some of the companies in South Africa will accrue the leave in the beginning of the month, or others will accrue it at the end of the month. It just depends where, but it's the same. Then if I move on to the sick leave, we've got 30 days for every 36-month cycle. So that adds up to every 3 years, you've got 30 days of sick leave. But I've put in brackets, there are specific criteria also that applies to sick leave. For example, if you take sick leave on a Monday or a Friday, it needs to be accompanied by a medical professional note that you have been off sick. In terms of family responsibility leave, we've got 3 to 5 days annually. But again, specific qualifying criteria exist for taking family responsibility leave. Maternity leave, we've got 4 consecutive months. That includes your UIF maternity benefit claim. That means as a company, you only pay a portion of the basic salary for an employee that goes on maternity leave, and the gap are then claimed back by the employee from the UIF, or Unemployment Insurance Fund. Okay. Paternity parental adoption leave, that equals to 10 consecutive days annually. And then at the bottom, you'll see I've put study leave and compassionate leave. Those are not compulsory, that a company allows study leave or compassionate leave. However, those are driven by company policy, whether your company is willing to allow study leave or compensation leave. Okay, so those are the normal leave that companies do pay for employees. I move on to the actual payment of leave or holiday pay in South Africa. So leave pay is calculated at different rates than your normal pay. So if you go on leave, or your normal pay is normally calculated, your hourly rate of pay times the number of hours you work, if you're an hourly worker. So your leave or your holiday pay is calculated based on an average rate of pay over the last 3 months. And that 3 months, if that included your commissions and overtime, then it should be added to the equation to calculate the rate of pay that you're going to be paid for the leave days that you take off. Okay. So then if we can look at the statutory submissions in South Africa for companies specifically, some monthly submissions to the receiver of revenue or SARS needs to be made before the 7th of every month. For example, if you run your payroll for April, before the 7th of May, the next month, you have to submit your submissions to the receiver of revenue. So if you are deducting employee tax or pay-as-you-earn tax from an employee, you're deducting unemployment insurance contributions, or if you deduct skills development levy from an employee, you have to submit these submissions to SARS every single month. Very important for South Africa, penalties on late payments result in a 10% fine if you don't pay on the 7th every month. So on the amount that it's outstanding, you pay a 10% penalty, and that's not negotiable. Okay, I'm going to move on to some more statutory submissions, monthly submissions to the Department of Labor. Companies need to list all earnings, all deductions that was made for a specific month via the payroll submitted to the Department of Labor. Then every March, submissions needs to go to the workmen's compensation based on your payroll as well for the whole year. And then during April, May, every year, submissions needs to go for the annual payroll reconciliation to the Department of Labor. And then that in August, your submissions for the 6-month payroll reconciliation also needs to go to the Department of Labor. So already there's a lot of statutory submissions. And then on top of that, we've got the Employment Equity Act that specifies some submissions. So in South Africa, employment equity is a real issue. And reporting and implementing employment equity as part of your payroll is taken very seriously by our government. So the large companies are required to submit a report every 6 months to the Department of Labor, detailing exactly their progress on employment equity, as well as the planning and what their current equity status is. Okay. And move on then. We've got our employer tax declaration. I mentioned that before, the EMP 501. So during April and May every year, employers must submit their annual payroll reconciliations, their declarations to the South African Revenue Service. The submission entails specific and accurate employee payroll information on a predefined format, which makes it nice because employers can now submit their RP5 or electronically to the South African Revenue Service. Then laws of retirement funds in South Africa. Now, we call it the new South African two-pot retirement system. However, it's been active since mid last year, so it's not that new anymore. But this means the new pot retirement system divides an employee's retirement savings into a savings pot for early access and a retirement pot for your normal retirement income. This allows for employees to access 1/3 of their savings when they retire as a lump sum in case of there's an emergency, then they can access 1/3 of their whole retirement income. And the rest of the 2/3 are then paid to the employee on a regular income during their retirement. Now, because retirement contributions are mandatory, it's usually the primary way for employees to save for their retirement. And often it includes an employer contribution. There's always a 50-50 split. So employee will contribute 50% of the total amount, employer will contribute 50%, or a 60-40 split, where the employer will contribute 40 and the employee will contribute 60. So these contributions that are made monthly to the retirement fund are often tax deductible, and the growth of the fund is also typically tax-free, which makes it good. Okay. Then I think lastly, one of the big things in South Africa is keeping record of your payroll. So all employees' records has to be kept for a period of 5 years at least. And that will include documents like timesheets, payslips, contract of employment, etc. This is not limited to, but these are the 3 most important ones. So something to note for employers is this is the responsibility of the employer to keep these records. The nice thing is electronic copies are acceptable. And then it's recommended that any document that relates to the receiver of revenue, that relates to tax, is to be kept indefinitely by the employer. Okay. And there is South Africa in short. Natalie, back to you.
Thank you so much. Esthie, I think, some of those really important bits that we covered there, like the employment equity, the recording of your payroll, and obviously those quite expensive fines as well, make it one of those payrolls that you absolutely have to know the legislation. You need to know the rules before you're going to start managing a payroll in South Africa.
Yes.
It seems like they're quite a complex tax structure, excuse me. Your statutory contributions, your employment equity, all of it makes it quite tricky. And I think like similar to a lot of the payrolls that we've been looking at in today's sessions, I think it's really worth getting like the opinions of an expert before you start expanding into the region. I've said it before and I'll say it again, people come to me all the time and say, but that's so expensive. But what's really, really expensive is if you end up doing something wrong and you end up incurring one of those giant fees.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the case study. We'll have a little look at things in action. So for our case study, we're going to look at a fictional company. They're called Brightcore Digital. And they've recently launched their operations in Cape Town with, I think, 35 employees. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you. There we go. So look, they've recently launched their operations. They're in Cape Town. They've got 35 employees, and they've got some quite complex legislative, can never say that, requirements under SARS and BCEA. So Esthie, do you mind just walking us through their payroll challenges, particularly around their UIF contributions, PAYE brackets, things like that, and how you would break it down and resolve that if you were going into that business to sort those issues out?
Okay. So the first one, I would apply the annual UIF threshold, the ceiling, build it into the payroll system using your UIF applicable earnings or monthly income to determine the monthly contributions to the UIF. So if this is system driven, it's going to be difficult not to deduct the correct UIF. Normally, we advise the payroll administrators, if you're unsure whether an earning is subject to UIF contribution or not, check if the employee works more than 24 hours a month. And if the employee is a regular employee, if it's not a student or a temporary employee. So typically, if the earning is taxed, it should be UIF applicable. So, yeah. In terms of the second challenge that we have, the pay-as-you-earn misapplication. So again, a lot of South African specific rules around the commission earners and non-commission earners. If you apply or assign a bonus or pay a bonus out to a non-commission earner, for example. So that's an employee that does not, he's got a basic salary, no commissions, no overtime, etc. We need to pay it out as a normal, instead of paying it as a normal monthly earning, we need to pay it out as an annual payment. So there's a difference in calculating the tax on that. So the annualized income installment method to calculate the tax, if it's an annual payment, uses your estimated tax payments that helps to decrease the underpayment of tax due to the income fluctuations. So for the commission earned employees that earns a commission sometimes and it fluctuates the income every month, it's better to request for a tax directive directly with SAST. They will then predetermine the tax amount that needs to be paid on a specific bonus, and then you're 100% sure you're not under or overtaxing an employee for paying out the bonus. Then on the employment tax incentive claims, that is when the company claims back if they employ employees that are new to the market, less experienced employees. The government have put a program in place to pay some money back to the employer if they do hire people like that. So I would suggest to also implement the ETI income bracket into the payroll driver to determine whether employees are eligible in terms of their age, the number of months that they've worked, because there's 12 months and then there's the second 12 months when they do work, that different ETI applies. And then I would suggest also implementing specific reporting to extract exactly the qualifying employees from the payroll and then use that as a supporting document for your ETI claims to reconcile back. Then on the overtime above thresholds, yes, that is a very important one, because the South African employees are very up to date with when are they allowed overtime and what the rate should be, etc. So it's important. In South Africa, the maximum number of hours an employee can work in a week is legally 45 hours under our basic conditions of employment. This is the standard maximum number of working time for normal workers. So on top of that, we've got daily limits as well. If an employee works 5 or less than 5 days a week, the maximum number of hours per day is 9 hours. And if an employee works more than 5 days, like a shift worker typically, the maximum number of hours per day is 8 hours a day. So overtime requires in South Africa an agreement between the employee and the employer first before they can actually work overtime. And then overtime cannot exceed 10 hours per week. So you should be very careful to make sure your shifts that your workers are working do not exceed 10 hours a week. So this can be increased to 15 hours per week. However, there should be a collective agreement in place that you don't work 2 months a year more than 15 hours. So that becomes very technical. So for this case, I would suggest if the company is planning to expand, it's a good thing to maybe implement a clocking system that can integrate directly to your payroll system. And the clock or the software in your payroll can then compare the employee's planned working schedule with the actual time that was clocked. And then based on this new functionality, the payroll will then determine if work was done outside the normal work schedule hours of an employee. So if we take an example, let's say an office worker that normally works from Monday to Friday and Saturday and Sunday they're off, and this employee is eligible for overtime based on his employment contract with the company. So if the payroll received any clocks for this person on a Sunday or a public holiday, the system will automatically determine this is now hours worked outside of their normal planned hours. And the system can then automatically calculate the overtime based on whether it's a Sunday public holiday, it needs to be a rate times 2, or if it's a Saturday, your overtime will be calculated at a 1.5 rate. So let's say we take a worker that is in management that does not qualify for overtime based on his contract with the company. No additional overtime will then be calculated or paid to the person by the payroll. So, Natalie, that is in short what my suggestion or recommendation would be for this company.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Esthie. I think you really walked through their challenges very well. Again, that kind of complex tax structure is coming up. The complex overtime is coming up. The employment equity is coming up again. So it's one of those things that you really need to get your head around and understand. Now, we're going to move on to a quick Q&A. So since we told everyone that we would be doing Global Pay Test, we've had so many questions in about every single region. And I've picked out some of the top ones that were asked again and again about South African payroll. So Esthie, let's run through a few things. So firstly, how should companies prepare for and adapt to the upcoming national health insurance implementation?
Natalie, that's a hot topic at the moment in South Africa. There are still a lot of unknowns that we are not sure about. But for employers, especially those who offer private medical scheme cover to their employees as part of their employment benefits, there will probably be a significant change to that. That means employee contracts might be impacted and renegotiated. We don't know that 100% currently, but during this transition to the new national health insurance, companies will be required to make several administrative adjustments, and additionally, businesses will need to reassess their employee benefit packages to determine which benefits are still necessary and valuable under the new system. So employers will need to update their payroll systems, definitely, to accommodate the mandatory contributions to the national health insurance, which could also increase your administrative costs. That's going to lie with the employers. So my recommendation would be for the companies to keep their existing employee benefits intact, to protect against any gaps in coverage and ensure continuous healthcare provision for their workforce until we know more.
Sure. So this is one of those topics that's going to keep on changing. We're going to keep hearing new things coming in. So anyone who is watching today or is even watching this on demand, it's probably worth, checking in with Esthie at EPI-USE, asking those questions. If you don't feel confident in those changes to national health insurance implementation, then the experts are there to talk you through that. And Esthie, if you don't mind me saying, you guys are there to understand it and help guide people through it, who maybe don't understand every single change that's happening in real time.
Exactly.
So we'll move on to the next question. And this one is about, is it SARS or SARS?
SARS, they are. We South African Revenue Service.
Perfect. So what are the best practices for managing SARS year-end reconciliations and IRP 5 submissions?
So EPI-USE provide various solutions for HR payroll systems, especially within the SAP ecosystem or SAP ecosystems. We provide support and services for preparing, submitting RB5 tax submissions, ensuring compliance with all the tax regulations. So my recommendation is to proactively, on a monthly payroll, do your health checks, reconcile to ensure there are no surprises by the end of the tax year when the RP5 submissions needs to be done. So if you do pick up there's something that doesn't make sense, you are welcome to contact EPI-USE, because we are really industry leaders when it comes to your tax and submitting your RP5s every end of the tax year.
Amazing. And like you said, it's so worth it to check those things monthly, make sure that we're spotting a problem as and when it happens, rather than getting to the end of the year and being like, need to do everything all at once.
Exactly. And need to do things backdated to last year, April, make changes, and that could impact employee payments that were undertaxed, and that could have an effect on employees' salaries at the end of February.
Sure, and we all know those late payments incur late fees as well, so always best to be checking as and when. So the next question is, how should companies manage employment equity reporting and the BBBEE verification processes?
Yes, I think the key here is to proactively plan to collect and store the equity relevant data, either within your HR or your payroll system. And that should be then aligned with the BEE scorecards and the Employment Equity Act requirements. Then the next step is to implement a process. It doesn't have to be an automated system process, just a normal process within your company to keep the data updated and relevant. And then thirdly is, how do you extract this information from your system? So make sure you've got a report or a method of extracting this data from your system. Then at the end of when you report on your employment equity, that should not be a problem. It should be relatively painless.
Super. And what are the key considerations for properly classifying and taxing different types of allowances?
Key considerations. So in my view, the key considerations is to understand the laws of payroll in South Africa, and that it's crucial for businesses to remain compliant. They need to avoid any costly fines and enhance their operational efficiency. So ultimately, partnering with a company like EPI-USE will simplify your payroll management, ensures your accurate tax filing. It will protect your employees as well, their rights, and it will then support fair workplace practices.
Sure. This one, we're popping up this kind of question a lot in these sessions, all about different countries. So here we're looking at expats. So how should companies handle expat employees and foreign service income within South African payroll?
Normally, companies in South Africa that does manage this on their own have a separate payroll only for expatriates. They tend to call it the expatriate payroll. That could become a challenge if you're not an expert in this area. Considerations will generally include whether a permanent establishment will be created for that employee. There are corporate tax, value-added tax implications, implications for the effective employee, and implications for the employer as well. So therefore, my recommendation is to try and outsource your expatriate payroll to an industry expert like EPI-USE. We will really guide you and help you with that.
It's definitely an area that people find tricky
Yes.
across most regions, actually. So again, talking to an expert who really understands the intricacies there is super important. Looking at retirement funds now. So what are the compliance requirements around managing retirement fund reforms in South Africa?
Okay, I've touched on the retirement earlier in my presentation. So retirement reform is a process where government, through policies, seeks to encourage employees to save and provide adequately for their retirement, to ensure that they retire comfortably and have income that lasts for their whole life while they are on retirement. So the South African government has proposed a reform to retirement savings regime that introduced last year in September, the two-pot retirement system. So from September 2024, 1/3 of your retirement contributions are split into your savings and the other 2/3 into a retirement component. So to clarify, the management of these retirement funds does not lie within the employer's responsibility or within the payroll that you execute. It lies with the actual retirement fund administration body that is seen as a third party. So in terms of the payroll compliance or the requirements in your payroll, you should calculate monthly the correct employee and the correct employer contributions based on the retirement fund applicable earnings of a specific employee. And secondly, it's the company's responsibility to pay these deductions, retirement contributions, over to the fund on a monthly basis.
Super. So to make sure I've got that right, the payroll teams, they do the calculations, make sure that the employee and the employer contributions are correct. They then pay that over to the retirement fund, and then the retirement fund administration body, they do the split. So they move it into the savings component or the retirement component. Is that right?
Yes, that's correctly. And normally the payment needs to be accompanied by a detailed report per employee to identify how many or what was their retirement funding income for that specific month and how that calculation was done. So that's also something that will come out of the payroll to the third party fund.
Super. So now we're going to look at what are the key considerations when someone's setting up a payroll function for the very first time in South Africa.
So if you are brave enough to set up a new payroll function for the first time in South Africa, a clear understanding of all the legal requirements, very important. You need to have to create clear policies for your company as well. You need to ensure accurate payroll calculations and then timely payments to third parties and SAST and all the legal bodies out there. So key considerations would include your registration as a company with the South African Revenue Service. You need to establish a payroll schedule. You need to implement payroll policies and choose an appropriate payroll system with the guidance of an industry expert like EPI-USE, of course. The alternative is obviously outsourcing your payroll to a payroll provider like EPI-USE as well. That is something that you really need to consider if it's the first time that you are setting up a company in South Africa.
For those people who are setting up for the first time, and they maybe don't yet have a clear understanding of those legal requirements, where can they find that information? Is there like a website or one place where everyone can find that legislation and set themselves up to launch a payroll in South Africa?
Yes, there is a website. Our government have clear or documents that they share on their local website. And the challenge is it's not always black and white. There are always gray areas that needs to be interpreted. And for a company like EPI-USE, we've got a lot of clients that interprets this and knowledge as well on previous experiences and best practices. And then we can guide you to say, it's not clear in the government documentation. However, based on the 200 clients that we already have helped with this is the way to go.
Amazing. I think, a lot of the time that experience is really, really like invaluable for new people to be able to talk to somebody who's done it time and time again, and has like seen those problems crop up. They've solved those problems. They've seen the legislation change and had to keep on top of it. So, I think it's super valuable to reach out to an expert. We've got time for another question. So we'll have a look at the future of payroll. It's a massive topic at the moment. Everybody wants to know what's happening in our industry. So what trends do you see emerging in South African payroll over the next few years?
I can see there are several key trends emerging in South African payroll. I think the most important one on everybody's lips are the automation and the artificial intelligence integration. And thank you to AI-powered processes, the future is already here. Automation is freeing up a lot of time by handling routine tasks, workflows, etc. Then cloud payroll solutions. That's another big topic. Cloud-based payroll solutions allow companies to easily adjust payroll processes according to change in their workforce without the need for significant infrastructure investment, and that saves them a lot of money. And then there is also great emphasis on data security, compliance, a shift towards more integrated HR and payroll systems. Yes, I think in those are the big topics at the moment emerging in our payroll South Africa.
For sure. I think, AI is really making things a lot easier to get things right in payroll. So, you can automate those processes, but also it's key for, like you said, compliance, for data security, for fraud prevention, even fraud detection. We're using AI to make sure that we're minimizing risk and really avoiding some of those huge fines that we've been talking about. Also, just getting things done on time. These things can massively speed up your processes, which allows you more time to focus on bits of the payroll that need to be done manually, that need that human touch. And then you're not going to miss that date of, I think you said the 7th of the month. You're not going to miss that date. You're not going to get those fees. So AI is really, really changing the way we do payroll, not just in South Africa, but everywhere in the world. And I think it's probably going to crop up a few times in today's discussions. So thank you so much. Thank you for answering those questions, Esthie. Now, I do have one final question, and really this one's for you. I think our chat today has just made me realise how much experience you've got, how fantastic your knowledge is of South African payroll. You've been in the industry, in your role, in your company now for almost 30 years. What would you say in those 30 years is the biggest challenge that you have faced within payroll?
I think easily I can confess that transforming from a legacy system to a new system, data is our biggest challenge. The mapping between two systems, for example, if you don't keep your data up to date, then you can have the best payroll system in the world, and it's going to be a challenge for you. So I think my biggest challenge and experience is really it's the data and keeping the data up to the standards that it should be.
Sure. And they do say nowadays that data is king, isn't it? The
Yeah.
data that you're managing is literally like ruling everything that you're doing. So if that data is incorrect from the get-go, nothing's going to run smoothly. So
Exactly.
it's probably a massive problem for a lot of the professionals out there. So one of those things to just keep an eye on. Esthie, thank you so much. Thank you for answering our questions, for running through the case study, and of course for your lovely presentation. I think, you know, for multinational organisations, it's really important to stay on top of this legislation, to stay ahead of the trends, to invest in adaptable systems, to look at ongoing training for your teams, and you can use this session to train them. And of course, partnering with specialists like Esthie, like EPI-USE, who constantly monitor the changing landscape. They're always staying on top of that legislation. They need to know the changes almost before they happen to make sure that you guys are smoothly run payrolls and don't have to get too involved. So it's no secret, South African payroll is very complex. It does require specialised knowledge. It does require really careful attention to tax regulations, to transformation requirements, even to those bits and bobs that are still changing now. So do keep on top of things. Do really watch this session, share it with your teams, share it with your friends, share it with anyone you know that is expanding into the South African market. There's experts out there that really can help you. So we're at the end of our South African session. Again, Esthie, thank you so much. You've really shone the light on some of those unique challenges. To our audience, thank you for watching. I hope that you've got some time today to watch through all 24 sessions. Do take a break. But if you want to catch up, they are all available on demand afterwards. You can dip in and out of the sessions that interest you, where you're either already managing a payroll or you're potentially expanding into new regions, or you want to progress in your own career and you want to just give yourself a little head start and learn some of the key important things within the regions that you want to expand in your own career. So next we're going to move north into Europe. We're going to stop in Switzerland. Swiss payroll is another super unique system. It's got its own set of challenges. We're going to continue with Borghese Margaret Colotti and JGA's Lewis Roskilly. But before we go, I just wanted to say thanks again to Esthie and just ask if there was anything you wanted to say to the audience before we go.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. I just want to say, if payroll is not your main business of your company, my recommendation would be to outsource your South African payroll to a known and trusted industry leader like EPI-USE.
100%. Go to Esthie for advice, call EPI-USE for advice, and make sure that you're running your payroll super smoothly. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in Switzerland. Bye.